Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry, pushing the envelope for human understanding and optimization, the podcast for podiatrists. The Pod of Inquiry is designed to empower you with knowledge. What happens from there is up to you. Your host, Dr. Stephen Barrett, has designed this show to take you down some very deep rabbit holes, hopefully bringing you back out again, relatively unscathed, but cerebrally whipped, enabling a better understanding of all things worthy of inquiry. If you have more questions after the show, then that is good. The new discovery today many times was the new discovery 50 years ago, only to be suppressed or plainly ignored. Medicine and surgery can sometimes take a long while to get their paradigm shifted. We hope to have a lot of fun on this show and maybe destroy some ridiculous dogma along the journey. Thanks for joining the show today. Let's start spelunking.
I'm really excited to introduce my guest today, Ms. Hannah Wendt. Hannah has a lifelong passion for longevity and breakthrough disruptive technologies that drive radical improvement to the human condition. She attended the University of Kentucky and graduated with a degree in biology. During that time, she had multiple research internships studying cell signaling and cell biology. After graduation, Hannah worked for the International Peptide Society as their Director of Research and Content. Through work in the integrative medicine industry, Ms. Wendt saw an opportunity for methylation-based age diagnostics and started Trudiagnostic in 2020. Trudiagnostic focuses on methylation array-based diagnostics for life extension and preventative health care. Since Trudiagnostic's inception, they have created one of the largest private epigenetic health databases in the world with over 20,000 patients tested to date. Hannah has since created Everything Epigenetics, where she shares insights on how DNA regulation has an impact on your health. I know that after hearing this episode, you'll want to get this testing for yourself and start integrating it with your patients. So without any further introduction, enjoy my conversation with Ms. Hannah Wendt. Hello, everyone. I'm here with my guest today, who is the Director of Operations and co-founder of Trudiagnostic, and we're going to talk about methylation of DNA and chronological age versus biological age. And so I'm here with Ms. Hannah Wendt, and thanks for taking the time and coming on. So tell me a little bit about how you got into this space.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for having me, Dr. Barrett. I'm super, super excited to, like you said, have fun and have a chat with you. So my background, I would say, took a pretty traditional path, went to undergrad at University of Kentucky, general biology degree, was always interested in science, though, from, as long as I can remember, interested in biochemistry, chemistry, and really actually wanted to become a genetic counselor. I would say that's a pretty big and upcoming position to hold. There are very few in the States now, but something for people who are interested in genetics to, I would say, keep their eye on. Actually found a really unique position, though, once I graduated undergrad at a compounding pharmacy, actually, in Nicholasville, Kentucky. Mm-hmm. So we really specialized in unique peptide products and created that market. And that's when I was actually introduced to this entirely new world of preventative and longevity-based medicine, right? I can clearly remember how that point of my life changed, because it's something you don't really know about, right? And until you're informed. So from there, I've created several societies, one called the International Peptide Society, IPS, as a way to really educate healthcare providers about what these peptides are and how they can benefit our health. The owners of that pharmacy, sold it a couple years ago, and we created Trudiagnostic and really tried to, use our audience from the pharmacy as a way to introduce them into this new world of biological age testing and these epigenetic methylation markers.
Fantastic. So I'm assuming that when you went through your biology and your biochemistry, they really weren't talking about the Horvath clock too much then.
Oh, Not at all. No,
Right.
I think epigenetics may have been mentioned in like a sentence with the definition of it, and that was all, but definitely not.
Well, before we get started into the esoterica of the methylation of DNA, why don't you explain to the audience the difference between epigenetics and genetics? And I think that will give us some foundation, whether you're a physician or a non-physician listening to this. So help us out with that.
Sure. And that's a great place to start. It's important that you have this, fundamental understanding of that difference. So I'll define genetics first. And genetics is just going to be your baseline DNA sequence, right? Your A's and T's and C's and G's. And those aren't ever going to change in the cells in your DNA and in the body. Whereas on the other hand, you have these epigenetic markers. And epi is actually a Greek prefix. It means above. So we're literally looking above or on top of the DNA. And the definition of epigenetics is going to be modifications that are happening at a cellular level to the DNA. So, there's all sorts of different modifications, but what we focus on and what we'll really dig into is going to be more of the DNA methylation modification. But epigenetics is going to be much more exciting. And it's, this huge buzzword at the moment, because again, we can change the essentially the expression of our genes and what genes are being turned on and turned off.
So I guess to simplify it for the audience that may not be, a medical professional, is that the epigenetics are the ability or what happens to express what's there in the genetic code in the DNA.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. I like to think of, a good example to use is a computer. So the hardware of the computer is going to be the genetic component. That's not ever going to change. Whereas you have the software component of the computer, and that's going to be related to the epigenetics, right? It's going to be sending those signals out. So you can think of your epigenetics as light switches almost, right? Right. Controlling what's on and what's off. Mm-hmm.
So the epigenetics can be affected by these different things that humans like to do, like smoking or non-smoking, good diet versus poor diet, sedentary lifestyle versus somebody that exercises more, maybe not to an extreme. Those are things that environment, lifestyle can definitely change, right?
Oh, absolutely. I would say you're not going to find a stronger signal than the one that there is between smoking, cigarettes and methylation. There's one gene actually, and if that one is unmethylated, if you have, I would say if it's more turned on, then you're indicative of a very heavy smoker. So some people even say that's better than just asking someone if they've ever smoked cigarettes.
So say that again. You're saying that there's one gene that it becomes very methylated if you're a smoker,
or unmethylated if you're a smoker. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then. So just to talk about methylation, so everybody has kind of a fair place to start this discussion from. A methyl group is what, CH3?
Exactly.
One carbon, three hydrogen, and it attaches to the DNA at some point between the cytosine and the guanine, and that either upregulates or downregulates some genetic function, right?
Correct.
Okay. So if you... well, I guess explain to me the process then of if I'm trying to methylate certain aspects of the gene and unmethylate other aspects. Is that what you're saying?
That would essentially be the goal, right? Because if to back up and again, kind of break this down a little bit further, if something is methylated, so you have that CH3 group attached, that is going to mean that the gene is shut off. Where if it's unmethylated and you don't have the methylation, that means the gene is going to be turned on. So we want some things to be turned off and we want some things to be turned on. So a good example there is you want your cancer genes or your oncogenes to be methylated. You want them to be shut off.
Okay.
But other things like your tumor suppressor genes, You want those to be turned on. Yeah. So you want those unmethylated. So it is very, very site specific.
Okay. And that's based on the sequencing of the DNA, or is that based on some type of, I guess what's hard for me to understand is like, okay, great. I've got this methyl group running around and it's going to attach to this DNA in certain places. I'm hoping it hits certain spots and not other spots. Well, how does the biological system figure that out?
Yeah, it's all going to be, I would say, from external stimuli, right? Like you mentioned, the environment or different supplements, medications, procedural based things. So these are all affecting what's being methylated and what's not. Now, when you look at it from more of a molecular level, though, it would depend again on the gene that is of interest, right? So we would have to go through and look at all of the genes that we can measure, and then according to what's available in the literature and research, determine if more methylation would be good or, less methylation would be better.
All right. So let's go to methylation and age, because that's what you guys are really into. Mm-hmm. And so I guess it would be based on that little piece of information, it'd be erroneous to think that the more methylated you are, the older you are biologically. Is that... Help me out there.
Yeah, I actually just talked to someone about this. So yes, that is the idea originally, is that most of your genes are going to be unmethylated at birth, and then you're going to gain methylation as you age. Mm-hmm. However, I think what we're starting to find out is, again, it's more location dependent, where, methylation may be a causal effect as to why we may be aging, right? So again, throughout our life, we may not actually want more methylation. We want to be picky and choosy on what we want turned on and turned off. So like you mentioned, we really specialize in more of the aging process, because that's really where these methylation markers actually got its start, where we started to notice them, because there's just a very, very strong correlation with these methylation markers being able to predict age.
Okay. So to distill that down for the dummies like myself, we want certain spots to become methylated. We want other spots to not become methylated. And the methylation of these different spots is affected by different stressors or different inputs differently. Is that? That's
correct. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So if I'm a smoker, I'm going to methylate things that I wouldn't necessarily methylate if I was a non-smoker.
Exactly. Right.
Okay. Now, once these things are methylated, can they be unmethylated?
They can. Yeah. And that's why epigenetics and DNA methylation is so exciting, because I'll use the smoking example that we were chatting about previously. You can actually change your methylation there. So if you smoked 20 or 30 years ago, you may have a tiny bit of a signal still, but you can actually, make it to where it looks like you've actually been a non-smoker, thus actually reversing your risk for smoking related conditions. So that is why these simple lifestyle changes can be so important, and that they have a huge impact on our health. And sometimes we don't realize that.
So when you measure these methylation sites, is there a specificity that goes into certain areas? I mean, some we want a lot of methylation and others we don't. I mean, do you look at certain segments? How does the technology work on that?
Yeah. So what we're doing essentially is we're taking a blood sample. I'll kind of back up and talk about the entire process. Is we're taking a little blood sample. It's just a little finger prick, and you'll put it on a blood spot card. You ship that to us. We're located in Lexington, Kentucky. We don't outsource to any other laboratories. We have our own lab, something we're very proud of, and it's a great asset. But when we receive your sample, what we're going to do first is we're going to extract your DNA. So we're taking your DNA out of the blood. We're actually quantifying that DNA. So we're going to, I should say, multiply your DNA, right? We're going to make sure that we have enough DNA for the actual process. We're just looking at how much DNA is actually in there in the sample that you gave us. And we're going to walk it through, some other techniques. We're going to highlight those methylated positions. We're going to run it through our Illumina technology that we use here, and we use an array-based system. So in return, what is really valuable is more of your raw data file. And that includes about 900,000, almost a million, methylation positions, which we're looking at. Okay. Now, Dr. Barrett, that raw methylation file is going to be pretty useless to anyone. No one's going to be able to read that or interpret that with their bare eyes. I think the technology that you were getting at is more of the algorithmic interpretation that we use, things like your machine learning, your artificial intelligence, to look at a certain number of spots, specific positions, and then putting them into those algorithms to create an output of interest, essentially, is what we're doing. In Trudiagnostic, as a company, we only used published, validated algorithms that have been shown in the literature to have that great association with what it's trying to predict.
Okay. So when you do the testing and if you're looking at 900,000 plus sites, I would imagine this is like what they call big data, machine learning, these types of things.
Oh, definitely more data than, we can handle. We have a lot of high processing speeds and, more computers in here than you can imagine.
So has your metrics for normal or a certain age, have they changed as your data has become bigger and bigger and you've had more machine learning to analyze that data? Has things shifted from a normative standpoint?
I would definitely say, what happens after we run your sample through these algorithms, we compare you actually to our population. So I'll talk about the population of people that we've tested first. Okay. We have one of, if not the largest private epigenetic database in the world. So we've tested about 20,000 people to date now. But I'll tell you, most of the people who are taking our tests are going to be relatively healthy. They're going to be optimizers, right? They're really trying to become the best version of themselves. So it is a very select group, people who, are choosing to take our test and are purchasing it. So I would say that has stayed relatively stagnant. But when we're comparing you to the population while you're taking our test, you have to keep that in mind, right? Because you're being compared against what I would at least call the best of the best in terms of people who are aging and trying to optimize.
So I did one of your tests about 4 years ago, and then I did another one. We're still waiting on the results. So if my results come back bad, then I'm going to blame it on machine learning. And there were too many, there was just another cohort. It was too big and too healthy. They came in there and it skewed my results. So that's, at least now you've given me a way to rationalize it. If
something comes back not in your favor.
Exactly. Right. So
yeah.
All of the sponsors of this podcast are listed on the website at podofinquiry.com. You can get great offers on these fantastic products and services, and this will help generate revenue for the show, so that we can bring you the absolute best content. Thank you all for listening and supporting the show.
Several years ago, I chose Alpinion as my ultrasound brand of choice after years of experience and research into ultrasound imaging. In fact, I have 2 of their machines. Alpinion has incredible precision and penetration built into their technology that, in my opinion, is simply the best value in all of the ultrasound imaging space. They have several price points to meet your needs, and I can tell you definitively that you'll end up having to pay double to achieve the equivalent imaging quality from other top brands. That doesn't even account for the unlimited software updates and remote tech support included with no monthly fees. Right now, to show their appreciation for the listeners of the Pod of Inquiry, they're offering an incredible discount. Their portable i7 retails for $21,000, but you can get it discounted at most medical meetings for $19,000. But my listeners will get it discounted to $15,900. This has never been offered anywhere for the new portable system with the engine of a console system. Use code SBPOI to take advantage of this incredible offer. You won't be disappointed with Alpinion. I sure haven't been. Well, tell me a little bit about the Horvath clock and the history of it, because I find it very fascinating that, you're able to, and then I want to tie this into telomeres as well, right? And when you and I first talked a month or so ago, we talked about telomeres. And so let's go into some of the history of Horvath and the clock, and then let's go into how it compares maybe to the telomere testing.
Sure, absolutely. So this, I would say the first clocks were really created in 2011 and 2013. In 2013, that's really when that Dr. Steve Horvath clock came out. It's looking at about 353 positions out of, the 900,000 that we test. And it's, that's going to be what's called a first generation clock. So I don't want to lose anyone here, but I'll get a little bit more technical. These first generation clocks are great. We could not be where we are today without them. For example, Dr. Steve Horvath is probably going to win a Nobel Prize for all of the great work he's done in this space. But what a first generation clock is it is really trying to predict chronological age. So it's still a biological age, but it's trying to get closer to your actual chronological age by looking at methylation markers. All right. So these clocks that were first created were actually really useful in crime scenes to, investigate a blood sample and see the DNA and how old that person may have been from a crime scene, or even for refugees to seek asylum to see if they were of age. So there's still value there in those clocks. So that's what a first generation clock is. Again, I want to stress their importance, because if they come out older than your biological age, or excuse me, if the first generation clocks come out older than your chronological age, you're still at risk for almost every single chronic disease and death. So it's a great starting point and gave us an amazing foundation to work with.
Right. And we know that age is one of the great predictors of chronic disease, cardiovascular disease, cancer, unfortunately, all of the bad things. So the whole point of it is like, let's try to keep our biological age as young as we possibly can to ward off the development of these chronic diseases. So how static is DNA methylation versus telomere analysis?
Yeah. So the DNA methylation is going to be very malleable, right? You would call your genetics, static. They're not going to change. Where these DNA methylation markers, remember, we're being influenced by, everything we're doing right now, the light shining on me, my environment, the air quality that I'm surrounding myself in. So those are going to be, great. We're going to be able to control them and change them for the good, or I should say for the better, or, maybe for the worse. But you also have telomeres. And I think hopefully a lot of your listeners, Dr. Barrett, can relate to telomeres because, they used to be the golden standard for biological age testing. They've been around for quite some time. However, what we're now discovering and understanding is that telomeres only make up a very, very small percentage of the entire aging process. So I don't want to, just ignore them completely, because they are one of the, 13 many hallmarks of aging that we now have. So they are important, but we think they may just be, not necessarily as correlated as we once thought to outcomes of our health.
Yeah, I came by a study, I don't know, a couple years ago, and I can't really remember it that well, but it was where they had twins in NASA, and one was up in the space station for a year, and the other one was here on the planet. And the one in space came back, and the telomeres, I forget which way it was. They were younger than they should be, or older. It doesn't make any difference because, well, it does make a difference. But for the discussion right now is that the gentleman got back from the space station, the astronaut, and it was this way. And then in 2 weeks, the telomeres reversed back very quickly. So it didn't seem like it had a very durable length of time from a measurement standpoint.
Yeah. It's difficult, right? Because again, from a scientific perspective, you're really getting your telomere length almost predetermined at birth from mostly your parental side. And then as we age, a certain percentage of that telomere degrades every year. So again, we're not really sure what it means to our overall health. They've been the most studied. My theory is they've been studied so frequently because we still don't know, what they actually do as it relates to our overall health. So we know they're there. We know they are correlated and they become smaller as we get older. But in terms of its predictiveness, probably not much we can take away there. So, clinically speaking, to all the healthcare providers listening, I would probably, challenge them and ask what difference that's making in their clinical decisions, because it's a tough one.
Yeah, it seemed like it was the wave about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and then the DNA methylation came on the scene. At least this is my perspective from being outside of the world. But then once the DNA methylation came on, the telomeres kind of got relegated a little bit. Like, yeah, it's still a valid biomarker, but it's not as good. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but the DNA methylation is a little bit more static, right? I mean, if I tested myself today and then I tested myself in a month, I'm probably not going to see too much, right?
Correct. Yeah, I would I would interchange the word static with precise. So they're going to be much more precise but yes, stable in that realm. And in terms of there's less noise from that interpretation or algorithm, right? So absolutely, you're correct there in that thinking. Mm-hmm.
What would be the optimal time frame for somebody who's really getting into this? Says, okay, I'm going to change my deal. I'm going to go in. I'm becoming a biohacker. I've got my initial test because I want to see where I'm at. This is my baseline, and I'm going to do all of these really good things from a health perspective for the next how many months until I run another test.
Sure. So to anyone listening out there as well, I do encourage you to test, right? But I don't want you to stop there. I think you really find the value in the retesting, because then you can, see which protocols work or interventions. And like Dr. Barrett said, you can do a little biohacking and mess around with your biology. So it would be very dependent on the algorithm itself. But as a rule of thumb, we would probably say at least every 6 to 12 months.
Okay. That's fair. So 6 to 12 months, you're going to see an integral change, provided that the human makes the change.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Okay. What other data are you picking up? Well, I guess we've haven't exhausted telomeres, but we've just kind of pushed them on the back burner right now. Mm-hmm. But let's go back just to the DNA methylation aspect of what you guys are doing. So share with the audience what the test results are going to tell the patient or the physician when they send that blood sample in.
Sure. So as it relates to our aging biomarkers, I can review some of those first. We have two different ages called your intrinsic and extrinsic. Those are going to be these historical based aging processes, basically meaning how have you aged since your inception up until now? All right.
Okay.
Talking a little bit more about the intrinsic, that's this overarching biological age. It's this pure aging signal, this fundamental baseline aging process. Whereas on the flip side, the extrinsic epigenetic age is going to be the age of your immune system. So, from a philosophical standpoint, we age in all these different ways, right? So we're offering a couple interpretations. That way we can learn more about how your whole system is aging. My favorite by far, though, and we can spend some more time on this one, if you'd like, is going to be the Dunedin pace of aging. That's actually more of, how quickly you're aging right now at this very moment biologically for every one chronological year. So that's actually an algorithm we licensed from Duke and Columbia University. And it's going to think of it more as a speedometer, right? Where you're slower, you have the turtle. If you're faster, you're the rabbit or the hare, and you don't want to be faster in this case, right?
Right. You want to be slower.
Exactly. And
Right.
that's really my favorite, just because, the validation behind it is amazing. It's, from a 50-year longitudinal cohort study that's still going on today in Dunedin, New Zealand. That's why it's called that, funky name. But it's really great to track changes. That Dunedin pace actually changes every 8 to 12 weeks. So that's the one you could test a little bit sooner if you wanted more real-time feedback.
Now, when I looked at the report a few days ago from my first test years ago, is that what you're referring to as the aging index on that report?
It would have been the Dunedin pace, or pace of aging. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because it just, on my report, it was just aging index, I think, that I saw. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe I didn't read it correctly. But if it's less than 1, that means your pace is slower than like a biological year is longer than a chronological year. Or inversely, you can get this screwed up real easily, but you want to age biologically slower than you would be by the calendar.
Correct.
So you want your number to be like 0.8 or something like that, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Actually, the one thing that we see slows down the Dunedin pace the most is going to be caloric restriction. It's actually called the calorie randomized control trial. It was just published in Nature last Monday, and it's been a preprint for quite some time. But even just 10% of overall caloric restriction has been shown to slow down that Dunedin pace. So I would say, the Dunedin pace is such a new metric that interventionally, the caloric restriction looks best so far.
So is that like there's different types of caloric restriction? I mean, we can restrict calories from a time restricted standpoint or fasting, or we can just, if you're taking in 1,700 calories a day, you take in 1,500. Was there any clarification on their restriction?
Yeah, it'd be the latter. So it wouldn't necessarily be time restricted feeding or, intermittent fasting or any type of water fast. It would just be, based on your caloric intake levels, with your metabolic rate and everything calculated in there, depending on your goals, taking 10% away from that. So just eating less overall. Okay.
Very interesting. And then in that study, was there any accounting for the other things? Like, was there a healthy user bias in certain people that were restricting more? Were they exercising more? Or how did that data show up?
Yeah, I don't think there were any bias. I'll have to go back and look, so don't quote me there. But it was again, healthy, non-obese individuals. So they were just essentially following them across a 2-year time point. I will say, though, the people who 10% was on average, but the people who performed a little bit higher caloric restriction, you're going to see a better result. People who performed a little bit less on average caloric restriction, they're, going to see a worse result. So this is a very introductory study, a really great one though, published in Nature, as I mentioned. The great thing about these studies, though, is that it sets a baseline for what's to come. So I actually just spoke with Dr. Daniel Belsky, who is really doing a lot of the bioinformatics and statistician work with the Dunedin pace algorithm. But he told me that they're actually following this group and they're going to re-up the study in about 10 years. And that was new. I had never heard that before. So it's great that we have these cohorts and this information, and then we're able to follow up years later to see, the effectiveness of different intervention and if that's still working or not.
Did they declare in that article about what their caloric restriction was? As far as did they set a certain, all right, this is the daily intake of XYZ calories versus it
would have been per person, based on their metabolic rate. So it would be different for every person, depending on height, weight. Mm-hmm.
Right. So they metabolically test them, see what their resting metabolism is, and then say, okay, we want to put you into this some form of caloric restriction and see how that changes the DNA methylation that y'all are looking at. That's very interesting. Now, this is probably a very I was going to say stupid question, but one of my colleagues told me there is no such thing as a stupid question. It's just there's a stupid asker.
I've never heard that before. That's new to me, but I like it.
Yeah. So all tissues, I would assume, undergo this methylation process. So does a kidney cell age as the same rate as a RBC, or are there variances? And then you have to extrapolate after, because you're measuring DNA methylation in the red blood cell, or are you taking it from white blood cell?
Correct. In the red. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So does the red blood cell, I mean, obviously some of these cells have greatly different times of life before they become senescent. So is that just an algorithm then, or is that just kind of a great, midline of all of the different tissues?
Yeah. And sorry, I'm going to correct myself there. We do it in the white blood cells. There's no DNA in red blood cells. My apologies there. So just DNA from the blood.
Right.
But you're exactly right. This is a great question. People are studying this currently from Yale. We have about 28 million different methylation markers in every single cell type. So it is going to differ from, cell to cell, organ to organ, and even, before the organ, tissue to tissue. So what's happening is it comes down to the algorithm. So the algorithms we have, the intrinsic and extrinsic, they actually work well in all tissues. They were controlled for those differences. What we're doing right now, Trudiagnostic, is a very large study with Harvard, actually, that it has been in the work for 2.5 years now, really, since we've been open, where we're gathering all of these data points, these different omic data points, and we're going to have new predictors and biological age outcomes based on that. But after, kind of that step in the study, secondarily, we're going to be creating organ system ages, or what we call these system clocks, these system ages. So your age based on your heart, or your liver, or your brain. The PhD student who's really behind that right now out of Yale, his name is Raghav Sehgal. I just chatted with him the other day as well. But it's, his study has been ongoing and for years. So we're hoping to get that published very soon, and then even be able to start offering those system ages on our platform, because then what that helps with, as I'm sure you all are thinking, is going to be more of a point of care based preventative medicine, right? So, okay, if you have overarching, faster aging, well, which organ system is aging? Let's find that out, and then let's focus therapy on that particular organ.
Got it. So that brought up a great point. How does the clinician take your testing and testing results, more importantly, and integrate it into a treatment plan for that particular patient? Because I think it's safe to say that almost all disease boils down more of what's happening at the core level, metabolic level, genetic level, whatever you want to say, and what we tend to treat as different specialists is usually symptoms of that underlying core. I don't want to say disease, but maybe aberration. I mean, you're not ideally calorically restricting or all of these things. So how would a clinician take this testing and integrate it into their care for a patient?
Yeah. So, I want to preface by saying you're never too young or, never too old to take this test. Again, we want to use it as more of a preventative metric to make sure we're pushing off the onset of disease diagnosis. So it's all about health span, right? Having healthy years at the end of your life, not necessarily lifespan, because I know I don't want to live till I'm 150 if those last 50 years of my life aren't necessarily healthy. So a healthcare provider can use this testing in a multitude of ways. First and foremost, it's really great in people who have, established anti-aging longevity practices or even hormone optimization practices, because aging is still going to be that number one risk factor, like you've been mentioning, Dr. Barrett, for most chronic disease and death. So we want to get them tested. Depending on their results, if they have advanced aging, there's different steps and protocols and things that we can approach from what I like to look at it as more of a pyramid approach, where we look at the lifestyle factors first, get those figured out. If those are, straightened out, then we can move on to the next kind of grouping, which would be, supplements, then medications, then procedures, right? We want to stay away from pharmaceuticals and procedures as much as possible. As I would say is the consensus of most people, it gets really way more expensive as well. So, where do I start? From a lifestyle perspective, we can lower stress, reduce alcohol, stop smoking, remove toxic load, improve insulin sensitivity. We can change our diet, improve our diet, I should say, improve our fitness levels, improve our sleep. We can, make sure we're maintaining a healthy weight. So those were just, a couple categories to mention where if that was something your patient was struggling with and it was evident that they were aging because of it, then that would be where you come in and say, oh, all right, what's the pathway to actually getting there? Right. So it does create a really nice treatment framework that you can work with your patient to objectively show them you are slowing down their aging, thus reversing the risk for those diseases.
Right. Well, and it's pretty interesting. The more you can get a biomarker or some kind of metric that the patient can see, it increases patient compliance a lot, because it's like, all right, I'm going to go run this race, but I need to know what I ran it in so I can compare. If I train more, how's this going to benefit, my aging index, these types of things. I mean, I think it would be very simple for people to integrate this no matter what they're treating, because again, it goes back to the human, and we want to make that human optimized as much as we possibly can, regardless of the condition that you're treating, because that's just going to stack on and increase your outcomes significantly. What about the accuracy of, I read a while back that this stuff is surprisingly accurate. I mean, you can take a specimen from somebody and tell whether they're 22 or 22 and a half years of age. Is that true?
I would say that's true for those first generation clocks that we talked about. Yeah. Okay. That you're trying to, those first generation clocks want to get more accurate because they're trying to pinpoint that chronological age. However, what we want to do is look at the underlying biology behind how you're aging. So, instead of being accurate, because we don't want to get close to your chronological age, we want to be precise. We want to make sure that, like you said, it's stable enough and you're not hearing noise from other outside factors like you would when you're maybe measuring your telomeres. So, yes, the first generation clocks are extremely accurate. Second generation clocks, which is what Trudiagnostic is using, these more predictive of underlying biological processes, are extremely precise. So yes, okay. You are right. Mm-hmm.
So the second generation is even more precise than the first generation?
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you could like if I sent my young MA's blood in on my card, you could say, no, dude, you're not 29 years old.
We could, some people test us in that realm, right? Because all of the samples have to be registered and you do have to enter your birth date just because we compare, our outcomes to your chronological age. Right. We've had some people put in fake birth dates and that's fine. We don't need your birth date for to calculate our results, but, it's going to look really weird on your report, right? So you can, if that ever happens, you could just shoot us an email and we can update it. So it's your real chronological age. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't do that because I wouldn't know, but I just thought that was kind of interesting. So let's talk about, you mentioned supplements. What about nicotinamide ribosome?
Yeah. And unfortunately, there is not going to be a clinical interventional trial looking at it. However, what I can tell you from a very uncontrolled metadata analysis review, basically looking at people who take Trudiagnostic testing and are taking NR compared to those who don't, who say they're taking it, on their intake survey, it does look like they have better outcomes of aging compared to those who aren't taking it. I always say this epigenetic field is so exciting. I'm very passionate about it. I love chatting and talking about it and educating others on it, but it is as equally as frustrating because it's so new that we're still learning so much about it.
Mm-hmm. What is the mechanism thought of behind NR? What is the physiological basis of, okay, let's supplement this? Because I mean, I'm kind of confused by it. I've heard there's questionable bioavailability on some of the supplements. What's your take on it, Hannah?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. We always have that question, is NR better? Is NMN better?
Right.
Is NADIV better? And we need a clinical trial on it. We really do. Just so from an aging standpoint, we can, see what looks better basically before and after you take supplementation or, whatever one you're choosing. And then not even that, Dr. Barrett, when we're doing these clinical trials that Trudiagnostic runs, we can actually identify which methylation markers are being affected, which means we can actually tell which genes are being affected, right? Which genes are being turned on and turned off. So we could actually look and do what's called a methylation differentiated region. We can actually look at those methylated regions and which ones change. So we can actually see the underlying mechanism of action for each of those supplements. So I don't know, what's been done in terms of that. Nothing from an epigenetic methylation standpoint, but there's a very large need for that. So I don't know. I can't really give a definitive answer there.
Well, that's a nice thing about these discussions is, a lot of times you can't give definitive answers, but sometimes speculation and conjecture, you can think about things, and then that's how studies get designed, whether or not they, support your hypothesis or unsupport your hypothesis. So you see that though in the biohacking world, the NR versus the other forms, and you wonder, well, and NR supplementation is not cheap. I mean, it's fairly expensive. And NMR, is it, and what is it? NMR or NMN?
NMN.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I think they're both pretty expensive modalities as far as supplementation and everything. Well, at the very least, maybe you get better urine.
There you go.
Right. Which, a lot of biohackers have very good urine. Maybe it doesn't translate to health, but anyhow, we'll tell everybody how they can start getting, to Trudiagnostic, not only for their patients, but for themselves. I would think that I don't understand why virtually everyone wouldn't want to know this data. This would be, I would consider foundational personal health data that you would want to have. So tell the folks how they can get it. I know you're going to give the listeners a code where they can get a little bit of a discount and get signed up and get it going. So tell us about that. And then
sure. Well, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me, Hannah, HANNAH at Trudiagnostic is singular.com. If you have questions and want to shoot them to Dr. Barrett, we'll work on getting those answered for you. But you can, go directly to our website, trudiagnostic.com, and we're giving you a 12% off discount code. That is going to be POISB. So if you use that, you'll get 12% off and be able to try these products. So if you're looking to optimize your age, like Dr. Barrett said, I don't see why you wouldn't, jump on trying it now.
Right. So, and then Hannah, you've got a podcast that's going to be starting here in next week, right?
Yeah, it'll be officially, I should say, launched March 1st. It's called Everything Epigenetics. So you can go to everythingepigenetics.com and check it out. You can, find me on Instagram, Everything Epigenetics, and, just really interviewing leaders and mostly research-based, I would say, backgrounds of people in the epigenetic world, and learning more about how these DNA modifications and insights can tell us about our health.
Very cool. I will definitely be listening. That's an exciting thing. I'm sure you realized how much work it was after you got started.
Oh, yeah. I'm doing it all by myself right now, too. So, I'm lucky I have some colleagues and friends that I'm getting some advice for, but it's not easy. So, give all of your, those listening, give all of your podcasters some love. It's a wonderful thing to do, because you learn so much and you get to, listen to the experts and that's very gratifying. But there's a lot that goes on just to be able to get the show on air and for people like yourself, just to take the time out of your busy schedule to sit down. I mean, I really appreciate that. And,
So we'll direct them there, and we'll link some of these things in the show notes. I'll try to find that Nature article because I think that'd be interesting. But it's very easy. I mean, you just put in DNA methylation in your search engine, and it'll come up with hundreds or thousands of papers just right off the bat. So, well, very cool. Hannah, is there anything that I missed that I should have asked you in this?
I don't think so. I think that was a great conversation we had. If anyone has any questions, direct them, our way, and we're happy to help.
Well, I appreciate you. Thanks so much. And I look forward to getting my results, hopefully good results. But if not, then that'll just make me change my lifestyle a little bit more. So
there you go. Thanks, Dr. Barrett. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Hannah. Appreciate you.
We hope you all enjoyed today's show and got some truly empowering knowledge out of it. You can always follow up on anything we talked about in the show notes, found at our website, podofinquiry.com. If this incredible and educational conversation has tickled just a little bit of your cortex, please leave us a review and spread the message to your friends and colleagues. Let's keep spelunking.
This podcast is designed for informational purposes only and does not constitute any medical or surgical consulting advice or imply a development of any physician-patient relationship. The opinions of guests who are featured on the show are not necessarily the opinions of Dr. Barrett or the production team. This podcast is owned solely by Barrett Medical and Surgical Media, LLC. While the show is highly oriented for physicians and healthcare providers, anyone interested in the improvement of human performance and understanding will find this a welcome goblet to sip from or guzzle. However, no representation or warranties are made in any way whatsoever on this podcast for any products, techniques, or other things discussed. Invited guests are not vetted by the Pod of Inquiry for their qualifications and may have a direct or indirect financial interest in what they present and discuss on the show. The Pod of Inquiry disclaims any responsibility from anything taken from the show and used personally or professionally. It is a responsibility of the listener to perform their own due diligence prior to the implementation of any ideas, products, techniques, or anything talked about on the show.